Hello and good morning, or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from today. And welcome to a roundtable discussion. We're here today to talk about how software is helping to make electric vehicles mainstream. My name is Eileen Weris. I'm a principal at Energize Ventures, and I am going to be joined by some amazing leaders across the software and the energy and electric vehicle spaces. Today, we're joined by Giuseppe Inciti, the CEO of Sitetracker, Casper Rasmussen, the CEO and CTO of Monta, Mike Wynn, the CEO of DroneDeploy, and Sahas Kata, the CEO of Smartcar. Before we get into today's content, there was just a few housekeeping items that I wanted to cover. First off, this session is being recorded. You will get an email afterwards with a link for you. So rewatch it, share it with your colleagues, share it on social media, keep the conversation going. And on that note, we want this to be a really collaborative discussion. So please, we want participants from the audience. There's a Q&A box on the audience module, so feel free to submit any questions through there. We will be monitoring those throughout the discussion, and we'll be saving time at the end to make sure that we have questions for the audience. So please participate. Okay, and on to the content. The electrification of transportation was one of the most impactful changes to happen in the last 50 years to the transportation industry, and it is going to continue to be one of the most impactful changes for the next 50 years. Despite getting off to a slow and somewhat shaky start, electric vehicles have seen a consistent surge in growth over the past couple of years, particularly in Europe, China, and in the United States. In the US, we recently surpassed the critical 5% mark, meaning that over 5% of electric vehicles, of new vehicle sales are electric. And we're still a ways behind countries like Sweden and Norway and Iceland, where 30 to 90% of new vehicle sales are electric. But what's important is that we crossed that critical 5% mark. And it's important because successful technologies often follow an S-shaped curve. The beginning of adoption is slow and a little bit unpredictable because it takes meaningful time to make the investments that we need in manufacturing and improvements to technology and understanding and adapting to consumer preferences. But once the right balance of those things has been struck, things can move quite quickly as the technology becomes mainstream. For EVs, this 5% mark is significant because it signals a trend towards mass adoption. Similar to other technologies that have followed an S-shaped curve, like iPhones or television or electricity or even the internet, with electric vehicles, we're progressing past the phase of early adopters into the phase of mass market acceptance. And the momentum for this movement is undeniable. Virtually all major OEMs have made some kind of pledge to go electric, many within the next decade. Thanks to the innovation of early movers like Tesla, the falling cost of batteries and other hardware inputs, and a boost in government subsidies, we are finally getting to a place where an all-electric future, at least for passenger vehicles, is well within sight. And the IRA is going to provide an even better accelerant for these already strong growth trends. Prior to its passage, prior to the IRA, Bloomberg was projecting that roughly 40% of new vehicle sales would be electric by the end of the decade. Thanks to improvements in affordability of EVs, as well as better access to charging infrastructure that we expect to come from these incentives and subsidies in the IRA, those projections were actually revised upwards, and Bloomberg is now predicting that over half of all new vehicle sales will be electric by the end of the decade. The combination of renewables, storage, and electric transportation means that we are on the path to decarbonizing roughly 20% of global emissions. In addition to providing a path to decarbonization, the electrification of transportation also provides us with a new opportunity to move from the analog world into the digital world. The ecosystem of infrastructure and services that developed around internal combustion engines evolved slowly over the course of several decades, in an era before we had artificial intelligence or affordable computing or software. Electric vehicles are coming of age during the digital era, and this means that everything that we do around these vehicles is going to be digital first, from the way that we fuel them, to the way that we conduct regular maintenance, to the way that we pay the toll on the highway. Today, over 90% of new vehicles are connected. This means that they're capable of bidirectional communication with systems outside of the vehicle. Virtually all EVs are connected. And as cliche as it sounds, EVs really are like giant computers on wheels. Electronics make up almost half of the cost of a new vehicle, and the systems inside the vehicle are spinning off loads of data, 27 to 67 billion unique data points per day. And when you layer this information on top of all of the changes that we expect to see in consumer behavior, from fueling, where you go from fueling your car, maybe once a week at the gas station, to every single time you park your car and you plug it in, or vehicle diagnostics, when you went from learning about what's going on inside the car a few times a year when you take it into the shop, to learning real time every single day, thousands of data points a day being gathered. You get to this place where the emerging tech stack around electric vehicles is going to look much different and needs to be much more robust than the systems that we had for internal combustion engines. Today, we're going to dive deeper into how software is addressing some of those challenges and some of those opportunities and helping to make electric vehicles mainstream. Before we get into the content, I want to give each of our panelists a chance to introduce themselves. Tell us a little bit about your company and what role you play in the electric vehicle transition. And let's start with Giuseppe.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Excited to be here. I'm the CEO of Sitetracker, and Sitetracker is a software platform that helps all the participants in this EV charging world plan, deploy, and maintain EV chargers. So what that means is we provide a software that allows them to manage all the tasks and milestones and work associated with the pre-construction, construction, and O&M phases of building massive networks of EV chargers. The folks that use us are OEMs, utilities, network builders, and their contractors. And we provide a platform for all of them to exchange data and documents and maintain forecasts and just stay organized. And that's Sitetracker.
Amazing. I'm next here. I'm Kasper. I'm the CEO here in Monta. Monta is an EV charging platform. So we're providing software for EV charging, connecting the charge points with the EV drivers. What we do a little bit different is like we are completely hardware agnostic out to the charge points, working with more than 300 different models. We connect into the vehicles. We provide everything from access management, building and load balancing, smart queuing, smart charging, all you need for kind of running a small site of charge points to a big fleet or even a public infrastructure setup. So that's Monta.
Hey everyone, my name is Mike Wynn. I'm the CEO and founder of DroneDeploy. Eileen, thanks for having me. What we do in the space is we build software that enables EV charging companies to survey their sites more efficiently. So instead of a person with a surveying wheel walking around a site trying to identify the suitability and placement of EV chargers, you can use robots and AI. That person can instead use a drone, fly over the top, capture the data, and analyze with AI. And so in the process, we can halve the surveying costs associated with EV charging installations.
Awesome. Well, hey, it's wonderful to be here today. My name is Sahas. I am the CEO and co-founder of Smartcar. I'm based in Mountain View, California, and Smartcar happens to be the leading mobility developer platform, which is making it super easy for all sorts of companies to integrate with cars of any brand using really friendly APIs. The customers using our API include a wide variety of organizations, from utilities, companies building DERMS or VPP software platforms, companies solving home energy management, commercial charge point operators, wall box manufacturers, and even companies building technologies like vehicle battery health reports. And we're just really excited and fortunate to be having a small role in helping drive this software transformation that is helping drive digitization across the mobility and energy sectors. And we think developers are at the forefront of using software to solve these complex problems.
Awesome. Well, Sahas, my first question is actually for you. Smartcar sits at the epicenter of software development for the EV transition. What kinds of solutions have you seen that help us electrify or decarbonize the way that we're moving goods and people?
Yeah, thanks, Eileen. I think as a starting point, we're starting to see in the past year or two, nearly every utility start to gear up for the oncoming number of EVs. BCG recently published a report stating that utilities will need to probably spend somewhere in the range of $2,000 to $5,000 in infrastructure upgrades to accommodate just each EV that's added to their grid. And there simply isn't always enough capacity to serve every EV at roughly the same time during peak hours. So what we're really excited about is that we're able to work with a lot of really innovative software companies like Energy Hub, AutoGrid, Bidgely, and other utilities who are using this technology to shift when cars charge to off-peak hours and even pause charging during demand response events. And most excitingly to me is that we're able to solve all of this using software. Software has actually a pretty critical role in helping shift energy consumption to hours when energy mix is greener and cleaner and more renewable. So these efforts will ultimately help make decarbonization easier than ever before.
Totally. Well, I'm excited to dive in a little bit deeper to some of those solutions that you mentioned. Casper, I had a question for you. So oftentimes when we talk about EV charging, it gets compared to this chicken and the egg problem of what's going to come first. Are consumers going to adopt EVs so that it makes economic sense for infrastructure to be rolled out? Or do we need the infrastructure to be built out first so that consumers can reduce their range anxiety and feel like they have everything they need for a smooth transition to an electric vehicle? And you have a really interesting vantage point at Monta because you develop solutions for drivers, you develop solutions for businesses, and you also develop solutions for ecosystem partners like installers and OEMs. So, I mean, from where you sit, what is your perspective and what do you think the bigger challenge is? Lining up the businesses to support this transition or convincing consumers that the level of service is going to be, where it needs to be for a smooth ride?
Thank you. So I think at this point in Europe, the consumers have decided to make this happen. That we're seeing a massive push for that. It started in the Nordics, as you mentioned earlier, but here in December, there was 100,000 new EVs coming to Germany in 1 month. So the push is really coming for the consumers now. There have been various like state programs with incentives, which have helped, and that's also why Norway was so far ahead on this. So I think the challenge now is for most is to understand how they future-proof a little bit when they are in the decision of installing a lot of hardware. I think the first thing to iron out is that this is not going to replace the classic petrol gas station setup. Most consumers would not go there very often. If you can charge at home or charge at your work, the destination charging, that would cover most of your need. So that thing about that the entire infrastructure in your city and your area needs to be full developed for this to work, that's a myth. That you can actually take care of that yourself for a large extent. But then when it then comes to businesses, I think the big issue right now is really how to is the large variation of options. There's so much different hardware on the street. There's new regulation, new rules coming in often, and I think that's the hard thing to navigate. Like, are you deploying something for the next 5 years that will this have to change? And the way we really see this is like that software is the key component here, that the hardware which is getting installed now will not be efficient enough to do anything besides connecting to a backend and and starting a charge, rest have to be done on the software side. It was mentioned demand response, frequency regulation, but queuing systems, other things to kind of get efficiency up. I think that's the key here to get it really good. So I think that's the couple of issues. There's a lot of hardware out there. There's a lot of regulation which is changing, and then you have the last thing with like, is the grid going to last? And you see different countries are now starting to implement different things around it. In some countries, we will now have to share all the information about charging with a centralized system, so they start collecting information. In other countries, they're creating rules that you have to offset charging out of the peak hours, stuff like that. I think that's going to be the interesting things to follow.
Yeah, I think the interplay between regulation, consumer behavior, and corporate action is very interesting. And the dynamics that are going on in Europe, like you mentioned at the beginning, there was that consumer desire to decarbonize, to switch electric. It'll be interesting to see as this plays out in the US, if it's, kind of the same trends that we're seeing. But I think on the infrastructure point, that segues really nicely into my next question, which was for Giuseppe. Sitetracker is at the heart of the rollout of many of these charging networks. And as we said, that's sort of foundational to all of this working. And the rollout of infrastructure is something that's getting a lot of attention right now. With the US announcement of the US National Charger Network and the open letter to the European Commission that followed suit, what factors are you seeing that are slowing down deployment and construction? And how is Sitetracker helping to kind of speed up or accelerate that deployment?
Sure. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we're seeing this kind of across many stakeholders, right? Whether it's folks building networks, utilities, OEMs, or their contractors, they're all dealing with a massive increase in volume of work to do to build these networks. And that volume is only going to increase. And what makes it difficult is they're also dealing with limited headcount or resources to actually do the physical work, and a challenging permitting environment to ultimately build these charging stations. So essentially, volume's increasing, some headwinds from, just available labor and permitting makes it a situation where the participants have to get everything else right in what they're doing. And that's essentially where we come in and help via our software, is trying to make it as easy as possible for these participants to manage this increase in volume, understand where they can do work, and do that efficiently. Allocating resources is critical in an environment where you only have limited resources and where volume's increasing. So that's essentially our view, is that modern software can help essentially reduce the turnaround times for each participant, ultimately allowing them to do more work, and also allow them to evaluate their business processes to make sure they're as efficient as possible. I enjoy meeting with these folks and sometimes asking them, well, what are your turnaround times today? And folks can't answer that question, right? Because they're dealing with a pretty tricky environment. So I think step one is, get a grip on, what's happening today. And step two is, putting the digital backbone in place to deal with increasing volume. And that's kind of where we come in and help.
Makes total sense. You touched on one thing, and Casper mentioned it too, is permitting. And I'm sure some folks that are in the audience today that maybe are less familiar with may not understand, what kind of a bottleneck that is. But can you explain that for just a minute?
Yeah, sure. So, I'm not a master of the topic, but just simply, you can't just show up in a municipality and just decide, hey, I'm going to go build an EV charger, right? You have to contact, that city or town, and they have rules in which you have to fill out certain paperwork to ultimately receive permission to build, right? And in some industries like telecommunications, there's a lot of legislation around the turnaround time of that permit processing to ensure that, there's connectivity provided to people. But, in the EV charging world, I think every municipality, every city has different rules. And that makes it extremely difficult for someone who's trying to build a charging network across, 50 states or multiple countries, to understand the unique permitting environment of every location, to understand, when you need your resources available to build there, right? So you file a permit, it's kind of a question mark how long it takes, and then you have to essentially forecast that to have resources available to, do work and do physical construction. So it's very, very tricky.
Yeah, just another example of how dependent we are, for both private and public collaboration in order to make this work. And I think no doubt there's a role for software there as well. Mike, at DroneDeploy, you guys sit kind of both pre and post construction. Drones enable a lot of advancements, both pre construction and post construction. Building off of kind of Giuseppe's response, how can reality capture improve how charging sites are being deployed?
Yeah, I mean, it was a good tee up from Giuseppe. It's all about efficiency and scale. And obviously software is at the heart of that. And you can imagine that all the EV companies are asking their teams in operations and construction, saying, hey, how do we deploy these assets faster and with lower soft costs? And it's actually surprising just the expense in people going to sites, and not the equipment, but actually the installation. And on the one hand, you need tools like Sitetracker to actually help in the process and how you scale this and create repeatable processes for installation. On the other hand, you actually need tools to help identify how to do this, how to do the site design, identify which sites to deploy at. And that's where drones come in. And you can imagine it's fun for the construction operations team to answer the question of how do we make this more efficient with, let's use some robots and AI. Those are the buzzwords of right now, but actually drones have been transforming the GIS and surveying world for about a decade now. And so it's actually fairly tried and true technology. And really what they're doing to create the efficiencies, instead of having to use a surveyor like we would have used when we deployed gas stations 50 years ago, that had a rolling wheel and a surveying tape and drawing things out on a pen and paper, that same person can actually go, or even a less qualified person can go on site, make a drone fly, capture data. At DroneDeploy, what we do is we automate the drone flight, make it go and take photos in the right place. From the photos, we assemble a 3D model, which can be to about 1 inch of accuracy and 1 centimeter of resolution. And so you can see the state of that site today, right now. And so you can think about it as like a super high resolution Google Earth and Street View, where any person can explore that site virtually. And so if you're an EV charging company, when you're doing site selection, you don't actually have to send any of your people to any sites. You can actually look at them from your computer screen. You can compare them and see what are the best sites with the best, probably the lowest costs given the placement of electricity. You can see the sites with the best amenities for people to go shopping, etc. And you can do this at about half the cost of sending a traditional surveyor. And you can do that a lot faster. And so that's like the key right now for all of our customers, is just like, we've got to scale. How do we do that? And how do we reduce these costs to make our company profitable?
Yeah, that's interesting. Casper, at Monta, you guys do a lot. You work with a lot of players that have to have a pre-construction strategy as well. They need to know before they select a site, across a variety of different spectrums and criteria, how this infrastructure is going to perform. I'm curious what kinds of tools, or how is software helping them make those decisions?
So I think at this point, like a lot of the CPOs here in the early days have just been deploying hardware crazy in all directions. And now they're coming back and figuring out how they actually start calculating a bit on the return of investments and starting to pick locations more and more. But they also know it's a race to kind of get the locations the next 10, 15 years. So they're balancing those things off. It's the big players here. They're sophisticated with different software solutions to calculate the good sites. But most of the smaller ones are very focused in their own region where they have the insights and the knowledge themselves and the connections. So that's the strategies you're seeing.
Awesome. I want to switch gears a little bit to the driver side of things. Sahas, how are software developers improving the consumer experience today? And what role does a platform like Smartcar play in bringing the various stakeholders of the EV transition together?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're excited about is OEMs continue to make EVs better and better. They're becoming more affordable, their ranges last longer, and they charge faster. All of these things are happening. But there's still an area that OEMs, in our opinion, still struggle with a little bit, and that's software. They're getting better at it, but there's still a long way to go. And today, most EV drivers may use the companion app that an OEM provides them with their vehicle. But the reality is most consumers are also depending or relying on a lot of third-party applications to serve all of their needs. So the ownership experience is not just a first-party one, but experiences that have been created by lots of third-party developers who are trying to make EV ownership easier. So what are these kinds of apps, right? We see everything from apps that make it easier to find a charger, ways to pay for charging, connect their car to their utility to get incentives or discounts, plan road trips, integrate with their home energy management system, plan it, if they're a small business, connect it to their fleet management software, or a lot of folks are now charging their EV at home and want to be reimbursed for their work mileage. There's just thousands and thousands of these types of necessities that have emerged with this new category of a product that's emerged. And again, it's third-party developers who are the creators building these solutions to solve these complex problems. And what we're really, the role that we play in all of this is it's been really tough for anyone to use software to innovate in the space. And that's because the automotive brands typically don't offer friendly documented APIs and SDKs. And that's where we really specialize in. Developers are able to, for the very first time, rather than having to go knock on the door of 30 different car brands and build a bespoke integration, they're able to visit Smartcar, create an account, get an API key, and use really well-documented SDKs to integrate with all the major car brands, all the popular EVs in one shot. And I think we're just lucky at Smartcar to be able to have a front row seat to seeing all the amazing things these developers are building.
Okay. And an SDK is?
Software development kit.
Okay, great. Just for everybody on the call who may not be as familiar with software development or APIs. Casper, kind of wanted to turn the conversation a little bit back to what we were talking about earlier, differences regionally. So Monta is based in Denmark. Y'all are a little bit further ahead than we are. What have you seen play out in Europe, or what lessons do you think that we can take in terms of how installers and operators in other regions are both monetizing this rollout and accelerating this rollout? And then maybe if you're comfortable sharing just a few examples of how you've seen some Monta customers innovate in this space.
Yes, of course, thank you. So I think if we look at Europe, I think we've been through it a few times here, that in Norway, they really fast picked up and got to 40-50% of the new cars sold, and they are above 90% now, as mentioned. And a few things they did up there was, of course, a very good government incentive. The high taxation on cars was removed on EVs, but they also did other cool things, like you could drive in the bus lanes, you could park for free in the cities, stuff like that. And then it fitted very well as well with the electricity grid and like the clean energy profile of Norway, and that's also what we've inherited here. But very fast, there were so many EVs on the street that the infrastructure was not kind of catching up, and they were starting to get behind. And if you look into some of the other countries, what happened then was that a lot of smaller players entered and started putting up charge points in their local area. In Germany, there's like almost 2,000 different charge point operators at this point. So it's very fragmented, and they're very local, and they have 100 charge points, 2,000 charge points, a lot of them. So I think this was the second wave of the EV infrastructure rollout, that a lot of smaller players started doing it. But then it got a lot more complicated in the last 5 years. Like 5 years ago, it was about having the RFID card. You got an invoice every quarter, every month, and that have also changed a lot. Now we're into dynamic pricing. You want to have live updates on your charging. You want to be able to follow that through an app. You want to integrate into the car and kind of compare the data points as well. Smart charging when it's low CO2 or low priced. All that got a lot more complicated. And that's where that was kind of what Monta captured and opened up a platform like Monta's for everyone to just join and democratize the EV charging. And then I think you've seen in UK, for example, they went a different direction. They deregulated a lot. They made it easy for smaller players, but that also gave some backfires in terms of like sharing their charge points networks with each other. So in UK, you don't have a really good roaming situation today. You need to have a lot of different solutions, even subscriptions with the different local players. Where in Germany, for example, they said like if you need any kind of incentive or help from the government to set up charge points, it needs to be open. So I think you've seen a lot of different ways of how to roll it out. Then there have been incentives to set charge points up at home. There's been incentives to set charge points up in housing associations and businesses, public infrastructure. And I think most of the countries today are still testing out different models. And I think that is also a little bit of the confusion there is for EV drives today. There's a lot to pick up on besides that you're getting into a new car. Everything is different. It's like stepping into a time machine, big screens, everything is touch button, stuff like that. But also like just understanding like what is the smartest setup for me? Do I need a subscription for charging? Do I need to buy a charge point at home? Can I charge in my neighbors? And I think we're still learning that and figuring that out in Europe. In Germany, they made a thing where you got like 6K euros back when you bought an EV, and that means a lot of the EVs was then imported to Denmark right after. So there's also like some of these incentives that are getting used a little bit different than that was expected. Yeah.
Great. And what about some of Monta's customers? I mean, are there any that you've seen that you think are taking a particularly innovative approach here?
So I think a lot of the smaller ones had to go with pretty standard models where they are selling the charge point and making small subscriptions for maintenance SLAs. But I think the utilities are starting to really tie their businesses together now. So we have a small race going on here in between some utilities where the hardware is for free now. It's like telco back in 2000s. They give it free, but then they tie you to a utility subscription. You see models as well where like it's you pay 100, 200 euros a month, and then everything is for free on the network. And I'll say like that's a model where it works very well for someone and less for others. And some of those companies also had to go back and evaluate their model afterwards. So I think you've seen a lot of different models out there now, and I think there's only more to come.
Awesome. Well, you mentioned telcos, and Giuseppe, Sitetracker serves telcos. They also serve a lot of the other infrastructure companies that are out there deploying electric vehicles, as well as a lot of smaller startups as well. Are there any observations that you can share from, kind of the wide variety of players that you interact with? Lessons
Sure.
from these companies and how they're creating profitable growth?
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing I would say is that they share this view that you have to essentially change the engines while flying the plane, right? And I think that applies very much to EV charger deployments. Folks are facing increasing volumes, but they can't just stop and upgrade their digital backbone of how they're going to manage all these deployments. So I think one trait that you would see across anyone who's deploying any distributed capital asset that I always find extremely impressive is delivering increasing amount of volume while reducing how long it takes to deploy each individual asset. And that's often done through technology and in the background continuing to innovate with tools like DroneDeploy, tools like Sitetracker, and other tools that help them again reduce turnaround times. What that allows them to do ultimately is also measure their vendors in a more meaningful way. So essentially all these industries rely on a long list of contractors to help them deploy these capital assets in all these different locations. And having that modern digital backbone allows you to get the most out of your contractors and assign work based on performance rather than, maybe steak dinner and golf rounds. So again, modern digital backbone, changing the engines while the plane's still flying, and then that allows you ultimately to redesign and innovate on your process and ask your contractors to perform. I think that's what we see. I think one thing I would comment on, it's been really exciting to watch EV charging network companies while they're public now, because every quarter, they're out there discussing how many chargers they're building, what their backlogs are, what issues they're facing, how they're trying to improve it. So I think you see some great operators operating at scale every quarter, really talking about the details of what they're trying to do to deploy more chargers every quarter. It's outstanding to watch, and all those companies are improving, how much they're deploying while their backlogs are growing, and it's just really impressive.
Yeah, I would agree. It's kind of a unique learning moment with all of the folks in the electric vehicle ecosystem that went public so quickly. Everyone's kind of learning in public, but taking those lessons, figuring out how you can use software to reduce the backlog and speed up project cycle times is it's been pretty exciting to watch unfold. Mike, the scale at which all of this infrastructure and these charging sites are going up is huge. And you've got a lot of different people, from field resources to construction folks that are involved. And how is DroneDeploy seeing successful companies adapt to this challenge of scaling quickly at a large scale?
Yeah, as Giuseppe's been saying, I've been saying it's been all about efficiency, and it's actually really exciting to be part of a technology rollout that's never happened before, where people can question every step that they're taking. They would have started small and they would have done things that didn't scale at first to get things rolling, but now is the time that things really need to expand very quickly. We're just at this inflection point of this S-curve. When you see that the most successful of them, obviously they're just deploying at scale now. So they've learned the lessons already over the last year or two about how to do that. And I'd say there's probably two things that spring to mind that they did really well. The first one was to share data. And that's, you can imagine there's lots of different people engaged on this, on these projects. And if you can get the same data to everyone, they're going to make the same decisions and they're going to be able to move faster. We saw a lot of companies actually repeating the same workflows just to get the data they needed to go to the next step in the handoffs. And instead, they can just share a drone map. They can just use products like Sitetracker and get involved and see everything that's happened before them. So that's the first step. The second thing I think is interesting is, like, because we're at the beginning of this rollout and the early stages, there's a lot more that the tools that exist can do that people might not be aware of. And even the software companies like us might not be aware of the need. And so I think for our biggest customer in this space, one of the things they did really well was just engaged with us and just said, hey, this is our workflow. Like, what parts can you help us with? And we were able to, one thing that they were doing was they were getting the drone map, which is a measurable element, and they were doing the measurements themselves with like pointing and clicking. And that was much faster than going into the field and rolling a truck out there. But actually, those measurements could be done automatically. We had a partner that had a little AI tool that would do the line works of the entire site and just deliver them. And then they found out, it's like, hey, we're getting this data and we're exporting and we're putting it in this design product. Can you just get it automatically integrated? And so we're able to do that for them too. So I think that's one of the things. Just partner with whoever you're working with and see what more they can do. See what else they can do, because you probably can find efficiency and just remove steps from a process, which is not just faster, but also reduces possibility for human error and just makes everything more consistent. And that's how you get quality and speed.
Totally. Quality and accuracy, especially when it comes to site selection, is so important. Actually, be curious, Mike, what do you think the level of customer awareness around using tools like drones and reality capture for site selection are? Is it something that most players are doing, or is it kind of nascent?
I think most players are starting to either adopt it or start thinking about it. You can imagine if you roll back it must be about 15 years ago. Remember when you got Google Earth? And that was this transformational thing. Now, for the first time, you could see any site in the world. And so that's where people started. But then they're like, hey, look, this data is old. This parking lot that I've got to develop in actually doesn't exist on Google Earth. It's not very accurate. And so they start asking the question, hey, like, how do I get this similar experience but of today's data at higher resolution with ground data, so I can see every junction box. And so they're starting to hear about it. It's growing really rapidly, and it's exciting to grow with the industry. In particular, as an EV owner myself, to actually use this technology that's being deployed.
Yeah, Eileen, if I could add to that, one thing we're seeing is this industry is becoming more aware that there are purpose-built tools specific for their challenge, right? So, a piece of construction management software that was built to manage the building of one commercial real estate building is probably not the same piece of software you're going to use to deploy 10,000 EV chargers. So from our standpoint, I think awareness is low, and we're trying to increase awareness. That's why we're on this call here, to just tell folks that there are purpose-built tools for your challenge, and the challenge is volume and complexity, not just a single, in our case, construction project that's complex. We have to deal with volume and different locations and a bunch of other things. So purpose-built tools and watching the industry become aware and demand them has been outstanding to watch.
Yeah. You bring up an interesting point. So for 3 out of the 4 panelists, EVs, electric mobility, is not your core vertical or your only vertical, I should say. Your Smartcar, DroneDeploy, Sitetracker are each somewhat horizontal in nature. You serve a lot of different customers in different spaces. How are you seeing your customers in EVs grow compared to maybe some of the other spaces that you serve?
I'm happy to take that first. What's been fun for us is, we do a lot of work in telecommunications, they've been building networks since the early 80s. So there's just like a lot of history with those companies and a lot of deep roots. And what we've seen are a lot of folks who formerly used to build telecommunications networks are now in EV, and they're unbelievably excited to just start fresh, and they have, I don't know, whatever it is, 20 plus years of learning or more, that they want to just, start again, right? With modern tools, cloud applications, and just not be slowed down by the history that we might have in some of our other industries. So for me, we're seeing it happen faster, be more innovative, and that kind of makes it a bit more fun as well.
Yeah, I'll add to that. So at DroneDeploy, we serve more than just EV, construction, energy, even agriculture. I think one thing that's been exciting to us to watch is that you've got these companies that need to deploy this infrastructure incredibly quickly. And at the same time, it's also these companies, like, you need to find ways to cut costs. So it's not just scale, but expense. And so they're having to do things differently. They're kind of being forced into it. And the only way to scale is to actually use this technology that's scale rapidly and efficiently, is to use this kind of technology. So it's been interesting, like being in construction for about 10 years, where the rollout was pretty slow, to being in this space. And the other space that's been very rapid is in solar, residential solar installations, where it's like, hey, we get to start afresh, just like Giuseppe said. How do we do this building with the latest technology right now? And being robots and AI, it's actually helpful for them being like, okay, cool. This is the epitome of technology that's available to us. Let's see how we can deploy it.
I can add a quick comment in there as well. I think what we're seeing is the number of entrepreneurs and startups and founders just emerging to solve problems around EVs is skyrocketed. There is hundreds of 2-3 person companies emerging, as well as a lot of large corporations who are actually investing a lot of dollars into figuring out creating software solutions to all the new gaps that are emerging with EVs. And a lot of these things may work themselves out over the coming years, but at the moment, I think there are a lot of really exciting opportunities. And I think we're also seeing a lot of venture dollars go really into startups building software solutions to solve challenges around EVs. So it's been really exciting from our standpoint, at least.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you. From our point of view as investors, one of the things that's just been so cool to see is all of the new solutions that have been created over the past couple of years that you hadn't even really thought of related to EVs in this transition. And working closely with Smartcar, you guys enable a lot of that ecosystem to be developed. And so for us, it's just been awesome to watch that creativity unfold. And I think a lot of that improves the driver experience as well. Sahas, maybe sticking with you and the customer experience, one of the biggest things that drivers worry about when switching to an EV is range anxiety. and just how different it's going to be for them to make this shift from driving an internal combustion engine or even hybrid to a fully electric vehicle. How real is range anxiety? What would be an ideal scenario for drivers when it comes to being able to access charging points?
Yeah, there's a lot of really kind of silly problems, as I call them, but actually turn out to be pretty serious. Again, I live in Mountain View, or in the middle of the Silicon Valley, and this is EV Central. And I have a lot of friends who've gone out and purchased their EV. They work at a tech company. They moved into a nice new apartment complex or development, multifamily housing. And these apartment complexes, as an example, advertise we have EV charging. That's like a perk. It used to be a pool or a common room, but now it's the common perk here is there's an EV charging available. And then people move in, and then they discover there's one charge point for the entire 800 unit building. And that happens every single week. I hear someone complain about this. So on one end, you have this problem where 80% of charging should be happening at home, which is what the statistics stats show. People really only drive 40 miles, which is like 65 kilometers. But yet there's large segments of folks who are in situations where it's actually not that easy to charge. They can't charge and leave it plugged in every single day. And then on the other end, you have charge point operators, and Casper can maybe talk about this side of it better than I can, but they're not getting enough utilization in a lot of cases. There's not enough demand being driven to the chargers they're investing in. So you have these silly imbalances in the market. And some of the things that we're able to do, which we're excited about, is help solve those problems. In one charge network in the States here actually utilize their technology to get state of charges from EV drivers who opt into their app and drive traffic to underutilized locations. And that was really an exciting way for them to drive traffic also not just to those chargers, but to the retail venues that those chargers were located at. And these types of software solutions are actually helping solve some of these imbalances in the market. And on another end, even if, let's say, it's not consumers who are facing issues with range anxiety, you also have folks who are semi-commercial drivers. One of the two ride-hailing companies is a large customer of Smartcar. And one of the big challenges they were facing was they're often pairing drivers with a passenger who needs to travel a distance that's greater than the current range of the vehicle. And you end up as a passenger stuck in a car with a driver who has a nice EV, but then you're now sitting at a charging station to get to your destination. And now they're able to use APIs and software to actually solve that problem. And they're able to solve it by simply getting the state of charge of the vehicle and only pairing drivers with passengers when the range is accommodating of what needs to be traveled. So again, these weren't problems that we necessarily had before, but these new EVs, while they're greener, cleaner, and charge faster than ever and are becoming better experiences, there's still gaps that emerge. And the great thing is, again, you can use software to solve these problems.
Casper, any...
Just to add a little bit on that one. Yeah, thank you. So I think like the thing with one charge point for housing association, that's the early days, and then there will be 10, and there'll be 20, and there'll be 30. But in the end, there will be half of the parking lots. That's what we see now in big parking basements and buildings here, that they take full floors and just like EV chargers and everything. But then they don't go with 22 kilowatts. They just do 3.7 kilowatts. Because that's fine when you're parked for 12 hours, 16 hours. So I think that's a way around it. That's how it will be eventually, right? But there's probably some years over there, and there it's about planning your day and knowing where to charge and knowing your way around the options in your neighborhood. Often they can also go together in the housing association and then actually pay for the infrastructure themselves. That's what we see most here now, that they go out and acquire that as a housing association together instead of asking the CPOs to come and put it up.
Okay. Well, one more question from me, and then we're going to switch it over to the audience questions. This last one is for Giuseppe. So we talked a little bit about Europe, and now I'm curious about the US. So the nationwide rollout that the Biden administration announced involves a number of the infracos that you work with. what will these and other companies need to do to effectively work together with governments to meet regulation? And can or if can these be applied to other regions?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's two things. The first is expedited permitting environment, or just any redesign or innovation to the permitting environment will allow the folks that are responsible for building these networks move faster. So I think that would be my first item. And then my second one kind of ties on something that Mike mentioned earlier. It's just thoughtful sharing of data, right? And I think if we're thoughtful about sharing data, it makes the entire group more efficient, and that'll benefit everyone. So first would be, anything we can do to help on the permitting side, and secondly, just being open about data and collaboration will benefit the entire group, I believe.
Fantastic. Well, that was all of the questions I had. We're going to switch it over to the audience questions in just a minute. But before we do that, I just had one other housekeeping announcement. There is a resource library with information on all of the companies that we just saw presented here today. It's in your audience module. So be sure to check that out, download the information there. It will serve as a great learning resource for after the call. And now we're going to shift over to the audience questions. So this first one is from Mike. Mike, how do you address the presence of underground services when designing schemes?
Great question. So yeah, for drones, obviously drones and data that's collected from like handheld cameras, obviously we can only deal with the stuff that we can see. But that and so for us, it's like we don't completely replace a surveyor, but what we enable them to do is to be way more efficient in two ways. So historically, every site would have been surveyed by a surveyor. Now only the sites that have been selected are going to be done by a surveyor. And so that's a massive cost saving for the deployment of EV chargers. The second thing is that what we're finding is that historically, when a site was selected, you just survey the whole site. So it could be a massive parking lot at a Home Depot or something like that. But now the specific area in the parking lot can be surveyed, which increases obviously the efficiency and the time it takes for a surveyor to go out there, and they might be using a whole set of tools they would typically use to identify underground services. I think one thing that's interesting there is I talked a touch about the whole life cycle of an asset. One thing we've started to see, and Giuseppe is talking about the sharing of data, is we have drones being used for the construction of these parking lots and spaces. Before the pavement actually goes in, we would have actually seen the trenching and the utilities. And so it's possible that there's already drone data in DroneDeploy from back in the construction. And so that's one of the things we also encourage our customers to ask. Go ask the owner if they used drone back in the day. Otherwise, you're going to have to do the work yourself with the underground services.
Wow, very cool to think about how a lot of that data may already be in existence and it can just be reused again. Love the efficiency there, and just clearly demonstrates how software can be useful. Okay, this next question is, there are a lot of software platforms with managed EV charging solutions being offered to utilities. Is this just a land grab, or are there a differentiator in the technologies that will find the winner? I'm going to say Casper and Sahas are probably the best two to answer this. So Casper, you want to go first, and then Sahas, you can chime in?
I can kick it off, yes. So I think, as I mentioned earlier, like 5 years ago, the expected feature set around charging was not as sophisticated, and that meant it was actually not that much you needed to build to have a decent public charging setup. I think where the differentiation is today is that you need completely different feature sets for home, for semi-public, public, and fleet. And I think that's where the big differentiators will be. It's like, will it be one platform which can do all this for you, or will you need to use a couple of different systems? And then I think the second part is quality and utilization. So uptime of your charge points, keeping them connected, and keeping a high percentage of successful charges. Here in Europe, we're used. There's a number getting thrown around in terms of how successful charges are, and it's actually very bad. And that means like 10, 15, 20% of the time when someone tries to start a charge point, it's actually not working. And I think that is our frustration, and for mass adoption, that needs to be 99.9% successful. So I think there's plenty of differentiators in software systems, and it starts with catering to the different user groups, and then quality and utilization, knowing all the insights to your charge points before a customer have to call the customer support and say, this is not working, where's the next one I can drive to?
Yeah, I can chime in on that as well. We work with at least over 30, 40 different companies that are building VPP or managed charging solutions or adding EVs into their DERM platform. And it's been really interesting to learn more about the space, because all of these folks are helping utilities navigate the emergence of EVs on their grid and their service territories. And what we've learned so far is that there isn't Swiss Army knife that solves all of this. The needs for managing EV chargers that are, as Casper was saying, maybe a apartment complex that has 30 or 50 or 100 charge points is different than managing the needs of a residential neighborhood that has one charge point for each household. And then that's different from, let's say, a school district that has 10 buses for commercial fleets, or a city that has a bunch of commercial electric vehicles in their fleet now. And again, then regionally, the needs in a market that's in a colder climate is very different than the needs in a warmer climate, or unregulated markets versus regulated markets. So there are a lot of software companies that are realizing that, again, one solution doesn't solve everything. And every company we're seeing is figuring out an area of the market that they know how to serve best for that particular situation and scenario. The question indicated, is it just a land grab? And I don't think that's the case. It's an incredibly large market. And there are, rather than having one broad solution that provides very little value to everyone, I think we're going to also see a lot of companies that are providing a high amount of value for the specific necessities and needs of particular types of customers and situations and scenarios.
Love it. So I think we only have time for one more audience question, but I think this is one that could apply to a few of you. So recognizing that mass consumer adoption will require an optimized charging network, what software tools are available to charging network developers to optimize site placement given variables, including driver travel patterns, existing locations, grid connection points, and capacity, as well as renewable mix of local energy sources? Casper, Sahas, you guys might be good ones. I think anyone could answer this one. I was going to throw it to Giuseppe, but I think he may be having some technical difficulties.
Yeah,
Sahas,
I can chime
in.
I wish I could say there's a single company that provides a solution to all those components that were just mentioned, but I think today it's a combination of the solutions that a lot of different companies are building that will enable you to get that level of visibility. As an example, companies like Smartcar are providing visibility into the EV cars themselves, like their range, their state of charge, their charging status, things of that nature. There are great companies we know, companies like Stable Auto, that are actually providing information on where to place chargers, as an example. There are companies like WattTime that are helping break down when the energy mix on the grid is actually cleaner or not. So there are a lot of different problems here, and I don't think there's anyone that solved all of them in a single box or single package. And a lot of the companies that are innovating in the space are actually putting together a lot of these different technologies to solve this incredibly complex problem.
Casper, you want to chime in? I know Monta does a lot around optimization and utilization for charging networks.
Yeah, I will just echo the message. I think it's about tying a lot of systems together, and I think that's what modern software development is. You use our payment gateway, you use Google Maps, you use different analytics tools, and it's the same thing here. And that's also what we are doing, and it's what makes it extremely complex in the end. And I think the solutions in the end will be built like that. We have a tool over here in called electricity map, which are providing CO2 levels across the different grids and bedding zones. Also a great one.
Awesome. Well, I think we are out of time. So just wanted to say thank you to all of our panelists for sharing your incredible insights with us. And thank you to the Sitetracker team for putting this event on. You guys did a fantastic job. Again, all of the contact information for everybody that spoke here today is on the slide in front of you. So reach out and keep the conversation going. And thanks for coming today. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.